Ellie, Jones, Russell Brown, kia ora. Thanks for your time.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, it was 34 seconds of cowardly behaviour that robbed Constable Matthew Hunt of his life. Now his killer will pay with at least 27 years behind bars. The judge dismisses Eli Epiha's remorse as fake, but the shame on his family is very real. Lockdowns meant a lag in detecting some cancers and a massive screening backlog. The holiday migration is looming, but do summer hotspots have testing and lab capacity to cope if COVID's part of the baggage? Doping, dodgy judging and animal cruelty means some Olympic sports could get the boot. And what's the antidote to doctors spreading disinformation? And Santa ditches the sleigh for a very sturdy van for Christmas deliveries. She's live.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. The police commissioner says Matthew Hunt's murderer carried out a cowardly and appalling act. Eli Epiha will spend at least 27 years behind bars for killing Constable Hunt and attempting to murder his colleague David Goldfinch after fleeing a routine traffic stop in West Auckland last year. Katie Doyle reports.
Andrew Costa says Eli Epiha's actions changed many lives and police will forever remember the deep impact of them. He says at just 28, Constable Hunt had his whole life ahead of him until it was cruelly taken away. Mr Costa says the killing has been a bitter reminder of the dangers of policing, and he doubts there is a single officer who hasn't been impacted by the tragic events.
Speaking outside court after the sentencing, Matthew Hunt's mother, Diane Hunt, says the family will never be the same. She says she wanted to face her son's murderer for his cruel and callous actions.
As a mother, I cannot describe the terrible feeling of loss of losing a child. I don't want another mother to ever get the news that their strong, kind and brave son is never coming home again.
Diane Hunt says Epiha's offer of an apology in court was vacuous and self-serving. Police recruits are being sent north to help run the checkpoints at the Northland border. 2 checkpoints will operate when Auckland's border opens next Wednesday, one near Uretiti and one near Maunga Turoto. Officers will be joined by Te Tai Tokerau Border Control, who will be checking everyone has the right documents. Police have confirmed that 46 recruits and another 46 constabulary staff who have just graduated from Police College will be helping run the operation. They will work with experienced officers but will not have any power to arrest. An independent advisory group has told the government the COVID-19 pandemic may stretch a decade into the future. The warning can be found in an August report out of the Forward Work Programme made public in today's release of COVID-19 documents. The group, led by Sir Brian Roche, says that COVID-19 will have to be managed into the long term. It suggested New Zealand needed to be able to prevent and respond to the virus over the next 1, 5 and 10 years. Tourism businesses are among those expected to benefit from a proposed overhaul of conservation law. Conservation Minister Kiri Allen has today announced plans to introduce a Conservation Management and Processes Amendment Bill and simplify the concessions process. She says that involves updating national park rules that are mostly out of date.
We need to look at why that is and the complexities that are associated with making amendments in order that we can be able to be responsive to, those concessionaires and concession holders that want to be able to crack on and have certainty about how they can operate on public conservation land.
Kiri Allen says the proposed reform will be undertaken in a phased approach with some consultation starting next year. National says it's clear the government had decided from the outset to force councils into the Three Waters reforms, but strung them along anyway. Cabinet papers show ministers agreed to pursue a legislated all-in strategy in June, but the final decision was put off to allow for what was described as a short period of socialising the policy, during which councils understood participation could still be voluntary. National MP Simon Watt says the 8-week consultation was just a box-ticking exercise.
it's very clear that the Minister had a preconceived idea of how this process would operate, and basically, everything we've seen in terms of the consultation has basically been to sort of backtrack back into that position.
Despite repeated requests, Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta has not been available for an interview. It's 5:04. England have finally dismissed Australia for 425 on day 3 of the first Ashes cricket test in Brisbane, giving the hosts a 255-run first innings lead. Travis Head was the last batsman out, making 152. A short time ago, England were 65 for 2 in their second innings, still trailing by 213. Meanwhile, a week on from writing himself into the annals of cricket history, black cap spinner Ajaz Patel is still coming to terms with his achievement. In the second test against India in Mumbai, Patel became just the third bowler in the history of the game to take all 10 wickets in an innings. Patel and the Black Caps arrived home yesterday and are now in MIQ, giving Patel, who emigrated from Mumbai as an 8-year-old, time to reflect. He says when he returned to the team hotel in Mumbai after his feat, staff made a guard of honour and presented him with a large cake.
Kind of somewhat embarrassing, to be fair, having this massive cake in the middle of the foyer with your face plastered all over it. Being from New Zealand, you like being kind of pretty low-key and discreet about things. But hey, look, I understand also, like, from a cultural perspective, it's totally different. In the Indian culture, being a part of something like that or being able to share that with someone else gives you a lot of joy. If you just acknowledged it and walked away, people would probably think you was being somewhat arrogant.
All Blacks and Crusaders prop Joe Moody has re-signed with New Zealand Rugby to the end of 2024. And a French woman has been fined $2,000 for causing one of the worst crashes in Tour de France history by waving a cardboard sign in the rider's path during this year's race. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, how Mary Quant put the fun into fashion. What Warren Ellis did with a piece of Nina Simone's chewing gum. And why our hardwired quest for status explains pretty much everything. And when it's taken away, disaster often ensues, says Will Storr in The Status Game. Call Kim Hillaho. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods and isolated showers, some possibly heavy tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Taupo and Taihape, a few showers, mainly afternoons and evenings, some heavy with possible thunderstorms today. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Wairarapa. Cloudy periods and occasional light showers or drizzle. More persistent for Kapiti to Wellington. Rain developing in the south and west late tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, periods of rain, possibly heavy, turning to showers tomorrow and clearing south of about Hokitika. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago, often cloudy. Scattered rain developing this evening, becoming widespread for a time tomorrow. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha mainly fine. A few showers about the coast, spreading elsewhere for a time tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods today. Cloudy tomorrow as well, with a few showers developing. It's 5:07.
Thanks, Marama. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. I will never forgive you. The words of a grieving mother to the man who gunned down her son on a West Auckland street. Constable Matthew Hunt was murdered by Eli Epiha in June last year and was sent to jail today for at least 27 years. The judge told him the name Epiha will be remembered for the cowardly killing of an unarmed police officer. A shame, he said, he and his whānau will have to bear into the future. Rejecting Epiha's remorse, the judge told him his actions showed no concern for anyone but himself. Katie Todd was in court.
34 seconds of selfish, cowardly behaviour. Today, the family and friends of Constable Matthew Hunt came face to face with his killer.
He will never be able to understand the depth of such a devastating loss.
We weren't just a group of friends, we are family, and Matt was at the centre. 34 seconds is the amount of time it took for all of that to change. 34 seconds of unprovoked, unnecessary, inhumane, selfish rage.
Watching you in court for 11 days only increased the burden that we will go through for the rest of our lives.
It's been 18 months since gunfire echoed through a suburban street in Massey. Matthew Hunt lay dying on the road, his killer calmly waited by a getaway car, glancing across at the officer he'd just shot. Today, Matthew's mother Diane looked Epiha in the eye and told him she would never forgive him. She says her family has been forever changed, her son cruelly taken from her.
My life is also essentially over. Any meaningful purpose to move forward in life is gone.
With Matthew Hunt that day was Constable David Goldfinch. He too was shot by Epiha. He said he wouldn't even tell Epiha what that day means to him.
Because you get to know nothing about me, and I'm not going to waste any more of my time on you.
Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says the events of that day have caused a ripple effect on the force.
But our people are only too aware that it could have been any one of them working that morning.
Epiha sat emotionless throughout the sentencing. He pleaded guilty to murdering Matthew Hunt, but maintained he only fired at Constable Goldfinch to scare him away. In July, after a 2-week trial, a jury found him guilty of attempted murder. The court heard Epiha was on parole at the time of the shooting and had a history of offending with semi-automatic weapons, including a drive-by shooting when he was 19. Crown lawyer Brian Dickey argued for a sentence of life without parole.
This was a wanton attack, Your Honour, on 2 uniformed officers with a semi-automatic military-style rifle, and it is a crime which has and ought to shock the New Zealand public. Of course, the sentencing is an opportunity to reflect the seriousness of that.
Epiha's lawyer Mark Edgar argued that sentence would be unjust and disproportionate. He says Epiha grew up surrounded by poverty, gang affiliations, violence and alcohol and drug abuse, and that may go some way to explaining his decisions that day.
In his own words, he is not proud of the fact that he is responsible for taking the life of another human being, almost taking the life of another, and causing injury to another human being. He accepts that he must face the consequences of his actions.
That suggestion was firmly rejected by Justice Venning, who declined a request for Epiha's letter of apology to be read out in court. Justice Venning said Epiha's actions had a high degree of brutality and callousness.
You made free choices on the 19th of June last year, from trying to flee from the police initially, then after the accident, picking up the semi-automatic firearm and confronting the police officers, to firing the total of 14 shots.
But ultimately, Justice Venning said it would be manifestly unjust to impose life without parole, given Epiha's age.
You are sentenced to imprisonment for life, but to serve a minimum period of imprisonment of 27 years.
Outside court, Diane Hunt said no sentence could make up for what she's lost.
We now face our second Christmas without Matthew, but he is with us in our thoughts and hearts, and he will never be forgotten.
Diane Hunt revealed she shook the hand of Epiha's uncle after the sentencing, telling him the murder was not his cross to bear. She's asked Epiha not to contact her for restorative justice.
Health professionals are warning backlogs due to lockdown are causing a rise in cancers that could have been detected months earlier. After 2 years of lockdowns, the Ministry of Health says the backlog for regular breast screening has risen to 50,000. And skin cancer specialists say they're already seeing an increase in patients with more severe cancer due to delayed appointments. Louise Tēnā reports.
Dr Heidi McRae was due to have a routine mammogram in August. When lockdown cancelled that, she didn't think much of it. But just weeks later, everything changed.
I started to get some very unusual symptoms which are not typical of breast cancer at all. And because I'm a doctor and knew what was going on, I managed to persuade Auckland Breast Centre to do my mammogram. And bingo, there was a 2.5 centimetre tumour there that I couldn't feel.
If she'd waited till her appointment was rescheduled to December, things would be drastically different.
I think it saved my life. You know, I've had 3 months of chemo, and the good news I had last week was that my tumour is shrinking. I've got a colleague diagnosed at the same time, and she had to wait 7 weeks before finding the lump to get into treatment, and her lump grew from the size of an apricot kernel to the size of an avocado pip in 7 weeks.
Thanks to her medical knowledge, she managed to get the mammogram she needed, but other women aren't as fortunate. Breast Cancer Foundation New Zealand's modelling shows at least 133 women are living with undetected breast cancer because their mammogram was cancelled due to the lockdowns over the last 2 years. That's why they're calling for help from the government, with an online petition asking for funding and resources, clocking over 10,000 signatures. CEO of Breast Cancer New Zealand, Aileen Rayner, explains why.
Each year, more than 650 women die of breast cancer. 1 in 9 women will be diagnosed, and that's over 3,300 women per year diagnosed. For women under the age of 65, breast cancer is the leading cause of death.
She's got this message for women.
It's really important to know that if you do have signs or symptoms, please don't wait to get an appointment for a mammogram. Please go and visit your GP immediately and get it checked, and they will get you into a fast-track stream. So please don't wait.
The backlog is widespread. Statistics from the 2020 lockdown show a 14% increase in skin cancer diagnosed after lockdown. With continued restrictions this year, plastic surgeons like Dr. Katashina McKenzie are expecting a huge rise in skin cancers.
Every year, about 4,000 Kiwis get diagnosed with melanoma. We do know that more than 350 of them will die. And looking at the UK data, when, for example, 1/5 of early-stage melanomas were undiagnosed with lockdown. So I think that may happen in New Zealand. Plus, we are going into summer. You have to remember that New Zealand shuts down for a month. People enjoying their life, and especially now, having been through so much during the year, everybody's looking forward to Christmas. So they may be more reluctant to go and see GPs.
And cases are more severe due to the delay.
We are seeing patients with more advanced skin cancers. They are larger because patients have been sitting on them. Depending on the type of skin cancer, some of them can be quite aggressive. They can spread to the lymph nodes, they can spread to other solid organs.
She thinks the message about seeking medical attention during lockdown has been missed.
We heard the governing body saying, if you are unwell, go to the ED. But I have never heard anything being said about, look, if you've got a skin cancer, you should still go and see, or even have a teleconference with your GP, so that can be addressed in a timely manner.
A sign to catch up on those missed checkups, even as the festive season approaches.
It's 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere ake nei. Coming up, what to do when COVID disinformation is coming from your doctor. Sports with a history of doping, dodgy judging and animal cruelty will have to clean up their act if they want to feature at the 2028 Olympic Games. The International Olympic Committee has announced the 28 sports have made the cut for the Games in Los Angeles. Skateboarding, sports, climbing and surfing keep their place after debuting in Tokyo this year. But weightlifting, boxing and modern pentathlon could be out. Felicity Reid reports.
The problem children of the Olympics, weightlifting and boxing, have been given 18 months to make changes or face being dropped from the Olympics after Paris in 2024. The International Boxing Association was not involved in the Tokyo Olympics, with its status as a governing body suspended by the International Olympic Committee in 2019. IOC President Thomas Bach has laid out what the association needs to change to keep boxing in future games.
Must demonstrate that it has successfully addressed the ongoing concerns around its governance, its financial transparency and sustainability, and the integrity of its refereeing and judging processes.
Boxing New Zealand's Keith Walker isn't surprised the International Association is still under fire, but he thinks the timing of the IOC announcement might save the sport. Walker says the Congress of all boxing federations early next year could be a turning point.
If all the boxing federations in the world are keen on keeping our sport in it, then they're going to have to elect the right people to take that governance through. It'll have to be watched very carefully, and we hope that we will get people with integrity on the executive that we can actually, manage it better so that money doesn't talk and that we get integrity back into the sport.
New Zealand sent 5 weightlifters to this year's Olympics, all of them on debut. But the International Weightlifting Federation's days on the Olympic stage could be numbered. Park says the IWF and their future leadership must initiate a culture change. Weightlifting has recorded 110 doping offences at the Olympics, more than a quarter of the total ever recorded across all sports, and has seen 49 athletes stripped of their medals. Previous warnings from the IOC over a need to clean up doping and corruption have been ignored.
They must successfully address the historical incidents of doping in the sport and ensure the integrity, robustness and full independence of its anti-doping program.
Modern pentathlon's issues are different to those facing boxing and weightlifting. The IOC's Director of Sport, Kit McConnell, says in order to be considered for inclusion in 2028, modern pentathlon must come up with a new fifth event to replace horse riding and cut costs. The high-profile incident of a coach striking a horse at the Tokyo Olympics has undermined modern pentathlon's reputation despite more than 100 years in the Games. McConnell says the incident has been reviewed.
They've confirmed that the horse riding discipline will not be part of the program for Los Angeles in any proposal they make. Obviously, it will be for Paris because the qualifications start in just a number of months. They're now going through a process of looking at alternative options that's framed around making sure the fifth discipline increases the accessibility to the sport around the world.
A decision on a replacement event is expected to be confirmed next year, and McConnell says by 2023, modern pentathlon's fate at the Olympics, beyond the Paris Games, should be clearer. Despite horse riding not being considered the future of modern pentathlon, the IOC president, Thomas Bach, says they won't be dropping equestrian altogether, which is good news for New Zealand, which has won 10 medals in the sport. Other sports can also be added to the Los Angeles Sports Program in 2023 when local organisers choose which events they want to add, with baseball and softball a mooted option.
It is 5:20. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. When Auckland's border dissolves next week, thousands of people are expected to start travelling as part of the summer holiday migration. And with more people on the move across the Motu, there is a greater risk COVID could surface off the beaten track. There's 95 new community cases today, most in Auckland, but Lakes District, Nelson, Tasman and Canterbury all featured in the count. So with summer hotspots facing a crush of visitors, do they have the testing and lab capacity needed if a case comes to town too? Well, joining me now is the President of the New Zealand Institute of Medical Laboratory Science, Terry Taylor. Kia ora, Terry.
Kia ora, Lisa.
So are our small towns, our summer hotspots, are they geared up? Do they have the lab capacity?
Well, the simple answer to that is no. The regional areas are obviously geared up to deal with acute cases that are going to come into their region. So what is going to happen in these areas is that those swabs that are taken will end up being sent to the mothership, so to speak, so one of the larger laboratories that's nearby those regions. So there will be delays when this starts to kick in.
Well, can we use an example? What about Queenstown? Let's say someone's in Queenstown, they're symptomatic, they want a test. Where does that go to get processed?
Okay, if it is an acute situation, obviously there is a small laboratory in Queenstown and there's also a medical centre and a small hospital there as well. And they do have the capacity to do quick one-off type testing just to confirm, but they do not have the capacity on site to do large-scale screening and diagnostics and surveillance testing. So any of those samples that are taken will have to take the 4-hour journey to get to Dunedin, and that may end up putting a significant time delay on getting those results back.
So any of the small towns that ship their samples elsewhere to be processed in a lab, potentially, are you saying that if there was a localised case or an outbreak which required a significant number of tests, well, there could be quite a nail up in terms of waiting for your result?
Yeah, there is potential for that, and just be aware there's only a certain amount of staff that are working in those facilities, and as I keep saying, we only have a certain pool of medical laboratory scientists and technicians in New Zealand. So yes, there is this distinct possibility that may happen, and I think the people travelling to those regions need to be very, very aware of that. And it's not just the testing capacity, it's the other medical capacity that's in these regions.
So what is your main concern over the summer?
Well, I've got to be honest, and it's probably more to do with the people that are working on the ground and have been for such a long, sustained period of time. And we do know that it really is just a matter of time until we do get widespread community spread throughout our country. And our staff, unfortunately, are going to more than likely bear the brunt of that.
So they're going to have to fire back up over the summer, you think, Terry? It's a strong possibility.
Yeah, but I'd just like to temper that with we have never stopped. So in a way, we're just carrying on doing what we're doing. But I will reiterate, all of the big hospitals will obviously still be operating 24-hour services doing the acute work that's coming through. But be aware, we do everything. We don't just do COVID testing. So sometimes things are just going to have to wait in those periods.
I want to just raise this issue that has been raised by your institute. This is a testing regime at Napier Port and Hawke's Bay where they're doing PCR tests, spit tests on site, and they're processing them. What's your issue with that, Terry?
Okay, we have no issue with them doing the work and the equipment that they're using and the methodology that they're using, the saliva direct test and the instrument they're using, the PCR instrument, is actually a fantastic piece of equipment. The big issue we have that none of this has been overseen by a medical laboratory scientist, and the laboratory or the site that it's occurring in is not an accredited facility to perform this sort of work. And the argument that's been put out there is that they're doing surveillance testing. Okay, when does a surveillance test become a diagnostic test? When you get a positive? We do surveillance testing every day in our diagnostic laboratories in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's part of our normal regime. So to suddenly throw those sort of excuses out is really not good enough. And I think it's a bit of a kick in the pants for the expertise that we have as scientists in this country to be excluded out of this sort of situation.
Well, they are saying that they're not trying to compete or minimise the important role that medical laboratories and scientists play, but the reality is that the public lab testing would not be in a position to regularly saliva PCR test our workforce the way we are as a surveillance measure. So their suggestion is that you guys can't keep up with demand, so they've gone for an alternative.
Oh, well, I dispute that there are a lot of commercial laboratories and private laboratories in New Zealand that are doing that saliva testing. And in fact, there's many commercial laboratories in the North Island that are actually doing the saliva direct test in a commercial setting. So I actually dispute that. We have the capacity to handle our public testing load. But the big issue is not that. It's actually that you need that expert oversight. This is not a job that you're walking off the street and have someone that's wandering around doing the testing. That is not how it goes. It's a very controlled environment. And how good are those results that are coming out? Who's checking them? Who's signing them off?
So, Terry, with both these issues, our capacity and capabilities in the regions and oversight of particular testing operations, does that suggest that, well, we've got a gap in how we're doing things? I mean, we have things like, chief digital officers and all the rest of it. Is there a chief lab officer in the Ministry of Health?
Well, there's a Chief Allied Health Officer at the Ministry of Health, but it would have been the expectation that during particularly a major laboratory outbreak that involved a lot of testing, which the COVID pandemic has, that surely there would be someone in a leadership role who is a medical laboratory, either scientist or expert in the field, that can help guide the Ministry of Health in the right direction to tie in all of these loose ends. It really shouldn't be falling to the professional bodies to keep the watchdog going and actually all the collaborations between the practitioners to keep the services running.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Terry Taylor, who's from the New Zealand Institute of Medical Laboratory Science. Now, we did ask the Ministry of Health to come on the program and talk about summer testing capacity. It declined. In a statement, it says COVID-19 testing remains a priority over the Christmas and New Year period. Community testing centres will continue to be open throughout the holiday period. Urgent care clinics will also be available for testing, but these are privately run and it's up to them to manage their hours of operation and staffing levels to meet demand for their services. And they referred us to a Health Point online directory where you can find a place to be tested. We'll put a link up to that on our site. In terms of Napier Port, they say that their testing is surveillance testing, not diagnostic testing, and they believe that's the big point of difference, and they have resourced their approach accordingly. They say they've kept the DHB in the loop from the very start, and that they have specifically employed 2 appropriate external medical staff to help with that surveillance testing. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira ānei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Summer hotspots and testing, have we got it covered? Are you comfortable going to a smaller town? Let us know your thoughts. And also on the Olympics, should we ditch the sports who are regular dopers? Which ones should we keep? Which ones should we get rid of? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Things are going from bad to worse for British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. An investigation is now looking into 3 parties that took place during the Christmas lockdown last year. Another probe has found the Prime Minister asked for more money for his Downing Street flat refurbishment, despite claiming months later he knew nothing about the payments. The BBC's Laura Koonsberg has been following the developments.
Nightmares on Downing Street. Behind every window, a different dilemma. What's the truth about last year's Christmas party in the building? Who paid for the Johnsons' expensive interior design upstairs? How can they control another surge in the pandemic? And can they keep their own party under control? When the Johnsons moved in upstairs, they had thousands of pounds of renovations. When the lavish expenses emerged, this was the Prime Minister's claim.
Who initially paid for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat?
He should know that I paid for Downing Street refurbishment personally, Mr. Speaker.
Yet the Tories have been fined thousands for breaking spending rules after a wealthy businessman tried to set up a special trust to pay for doing up the flat. The real tangle is whether Boris Johnson has been straight about what happened. He told a previous investigation he hadn't known exactly where the cash came from until February this year. But today's report showed he sent a wealthy donor a WhatsApp about the cash several months before. Downing Street's defence, it suggested he knew this wealthy donor was overseeing the money, but not that he was directly providing the cash himself.
Boris Johnson's taking the British public for fools. He's not only broken the law, but made a mockery of the standards we expect.
And even though there's been tears and a resignation, Number 10's hardly recovered from denials and non-denials about parties under its roof.
I am truly sorry.
Was there a party at Downing Street? Are you planning to resign?
Other staff caught joking about what happened are still trying to move fast enough to continue on.
Thank you very much.
Will a formal investigation catch up with what really happened? At not 1, not 2, but 3, what the government is still calling gatherings.
Of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 27th of November 2020, a gathering at the Department for Education on the 10th of December 2020, and allegations made of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 18th of December 2020.
But it's the emptying of offices next week, the return of tighter COVID restrictions, vaccine passports to get into venues that's stirring strong feelings. Dozens of Tory MPs have already vowed to vote against the plans next week. And this is all provoking private questions about the Prime Minister's future, with a warning from the past.
The mood of the Conservative Party is sulphurous, and what we need now is a bit of grit from number 10. It's no good having these stories dragged out by the media. The government needs to make a clean breast of it. The Conservative Party history is littered with ruthlessness on these occasions, but I'm confident that Boris will get a grip.
There is exasperation in the Tory party about what's been happening, and near universal agreement that someone, somehow, has to take control of what's happening here. But a universal belief that that will certainly happen, that's a different matter. Downing Street will soon be home for a new baby girl, born happy and healthy to the Johnsons this morning. But what many Conservatives also want to see is rigour and clear logic in residence behind that famous door.
And that was the BBC's Laura Koonsberg. E te iwi e haere ake nei I a Checkpoint. Small in numbers but potentially big in sway. What to do about the doctors of disinformation. We check out the sea monsters at Otago University and the rural delivery driver who's bringing some Christmas cheer. Homai o whakaaro, would love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do get in touch. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. The man who murdered Constable Matthew Hunt and tried to kill his colleague has been told how his 34 seconds of selfish, cowardly behaviour has forever changed lives. Eli Epiha was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years behind bars in the High Court in Auckland. It's been revealed he was on parole and had a history of offending with semi-automatic guns. Police recruits are being sent north to help run checkpoints at the Northland border. 2 checkpoints will operate when Auckland's border opens next Wednesday. Officers will be joined by Te Tai Tokerau Border Control, who will be checking everyone has the right documents. The Ministry of Health has promised to give all data of unvaccinated Māori in the North Island to the Whānau Order Commissioning Agency. It's a back down by the Ministry, which up to now has defied High Court requests to hand over the data. The Waitangi Tribunal has heard that the Crown did not breach the treaty in the pandemic response and vaccine rollout for Māori. 2 more people have died with COVID-19, taking the death toll in the pandemic to 46. There are 95 new community cases of COVID today. An Auckland doctor is warning a lockdown backlog is causing a rise in breast cancer that could have been detected months earlier. Breast Cancer Foundation NZ's modelling shows at least 133 women are living with undetected breast cancer because their mammogram was cancelled in lockdown. The government has laid out plans for overhauling what it calls antiquated and inadequate conservation laws. The plans include reviewing the Wildlife Act, increasing protection of Hauraki Golf, simplifying the concessions process and addressing long-standing issues with national park rules. And at least 53 people have been killed and dozens injured in southern Mexico after a truck crashed and overturned. More than 100 people, believed to be migrants from Central America, were crammed into the truck's trailer. Those are the headlines. Our next update is at 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, ko taku hoa inai ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio to talk all things business. Let's start with tourism and Tourism Holdings. It's merging with an Australian company, Australia's Apollo Tourism. What's the deal here?
Well, there are similar sorts of businesses. They got the recreational vehicles, the camper vans. Tourism Holdings also has some tourism assets as well, but they have a big reach. You know, they've got operations in Europe and of course North America, Australia, New Zealand, both these companies. And so the merger will strengthen their hand, so to speak. It's not a done deal for sure, but the deal is worth about $143 million. And what happens is basically Apollo merges into Tourism Holdings, and they take a 25% stake. It's a complicated deal, so to figure it out, you had to do a lot of mathematical gymnastics, believe me.
Yeah.
It was fairly taxing, but it came out about $143 million is what the deal's probably worth, but it's still not a done deal. There's a lot of hurdles over to get over there. And one of the things that was interesting is that Tourism Holdings also offered an update on their first half and their second half. And they're saying, look, we're going to make a loss in our first half of somewhere between 4 and 7 million. That's for the period ending December 31st. And they said the second half is very uncertain. They don't know where they're going to end up because, of course, the Omicron and the border. They're saying, given where we're at right now, they don't see a lot of upside in terms of trans-Tasman tourism. So I don't know exactly.
So do they need this, Nona? Do they need it to kind of diversify?
Yeah, I think that both sides need it. I think it's a good plan. The market certainly liked it. They gave the share price a boost. This is Tourism Holdings share price 6% up today, $3.02, and that started the day at $2.85. So good innings for Tourism Holdings. It probably is going to be a good deal if they can get it over the line, but that's still to be seen, and it will take at least until probably the end of the first half of next year. So maybe by June they'll have a deal done.
Okay, let's talk about manufacturing activity, right? It contracted in November. Now, that's sort of suggesting a slowdown. Weren't we expecting it to bounce back?
Well, you know, people might remember 2020 when we had that first round of COVID. And then the doomsday talk about the economy. And then, of course, it didn't happen. We had a really strong bounce, and so everyone thought, maybe this will happen again. But these latest numbers, which are based on actual activity in the manufacturing sector, suggests that there is a slowdown and that inflationary pressures have crept in. Neither of these things are good for the economy. It suggests the fourth quarter numbers are going to be soft. We haven't got the third quarter numbers yet, so the third quarter ending
We're always
September.
looking back.
Yeah, we're always a long way back. So you probably won't see the fourth quarter numbers for a long time. But these go right to the heart of the fourth quarter. These are November figures, and they're not very good. We saw a contraction in finished stock. Employment activity also slowed, as well as deliveries. These are not positive indicators for the sector. We'll know a little bit more on Monday when they release the services index numbers, so we'll have those. And they make a big part of the economy, so we'll get a better idea of where we're at right now. We don't have a lot of numbers that tell us where we're at right now.
Yeah.
So this is probably one of the better ones we have.
And numbers that will tell us where we are right now. What about the markets?
Well, look, I was watching the markets today because I was going to come here and I was very excited to tell you whatever. And anything. I'll tell you anything. Anyways, the market was flat most of the day. The NZX Top 50 Index looked flat. And then, boom, at the end of the day, we had a 78-point gain to 12,850. That's a gain of nearly 2/3%. And the New Zealand dollar just popped up above 68 cents. US 95 Australian and 51.4 pence. So a little bit perky finish to the week there.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with our business news. Anti-vax doctors may be small in number, but the two letters in front of their name carry significant weight with their patients. Several investigations are underway into Dr. Joni Gerard, who was caught on camera handing out medical certificates for people to avoid getting the vaccine. Complaints have also been made about other doctors around the country. Dr. Brian Betty is the medical director of the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners and joins me now. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Lisa.
So how many do you reckon are out there of these doctors who are disseminating disinformation?
Look, it's a very small number. We have about just over 5,500 general practitioners across New Zealand. We estimate that the anti-vax doctors are less than 30 around the country, and this one case has come to light so far. So, look, it is a very, very small number of doctors who are involved with this around the country.
Yeah, I suppose those are the ones we know about, right? And in terms of the numbers, they are small. But what about their influence? Their influence arguably is disproportionate, isn't it?
I think that's the case. I think because you've got a DR in front of your name, you're supposedly trained in medicine, that often doctors do carry a lot of weight in terms of what they say, their beliefs and views, and that can be quite influential on the beliefs of patients that they service or see. So I think you're right. I think it is disproportionate. It is really disappointing this happens, but it is, as I said, a very small number.
Is it a coincidence that a few of them seem to be in small communities, or is that where they retreat to?
No, look, I just think it's coincidence. And again, look, a couple of the anti-vax doctors who have been identified are in small communities and have actually served those communities really well over a number of years. This issue has arisen, and for whatever reason, these beliefs are there with these practitioners. And yeah, it is not a position that the College of GPs backs. We've been very, very clear that we are very pro-vaccination. We back the science and we back the need for vaccination in this country.
So what effect can it have, though, if, there's one doctor in a small town when it comes to vaccination rates? Because some of the small areas that they are in, they don't have great vaccination rates.
Well, this could be an effect of the underlying belief about vaccination. So there's no doubt that can influence certain populations, and I think that again that impact can be amplified in an area where there may be the only access to one of these practitioners to service that community. So you're right, there has been some commentary around this about whether there is influence on vaccination rates when these doctors have these beliefs, and that is a distinct possibility, and it is certainly of concern.
So what do we do about it, right? Because they're medical professionals. They're part of a profession that holds a lot of mana and they have sway. So what can you do to counter it?
Look, at the end of the day, doctors, like anyone else, are allowed to hold personal views. The standards in the country say if you do hold those personal views, they shouldn't influence the information, the balanced information that you give a patient in terms of their choice for medical treatment. Now, that is the key principle of practicing. That is a key principle of practicing medicine. So certainly, when these issues come to light, as we've seen in Kaiapoi, then that is dealt with, is taken very seriously, and it's dealt with very seriously. So that particular case is now in front of the Medical Council, which is a regulatory body for doctors. There'll be an investigation and there'll be appropriate action taken. The Ministry of Health will be involved in that as well. So when a line is crossed, such as this case, then there is action that is taken.
So what about people who are getting some of the dodgy paperwork, right? And I'm not talking about the patients that are getting it, but what if someone turns up to your workplace with this thing, certificate, whatever, call it what you want, they're not real. What are people supposed to be watching out for, and how do they deal with that? Because it's coming from a doctor.
I think this is really, really critically important. There is only one process that's allowed in this country for the issuing of vaccine exemptions. That is an official process that goes through the Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Health documentation is given if the vaccine exemption is legitimate. Anything on vaccine exemptions that is written outside of that, coming from a GP, is essentially voided. It's worthless. Now, I think the issue here is employers in particular need to be aware that that is the case. And I think there probably has been a low level of awareness about the official process for getting a vaccine exemption. So it does need to be an official exemption from the Ministry of Health after an application is made, and that is the only process we have. So accept nothing else, you reckon? As far as a vaccine exemption for the COVID vaccine, yeah, that is correct. You need to, if you're an employer and are presented with one of these certificates, and it is an official and it's not from the ministry, then you need to be asking questions about it and where it's come from. And again, it is not legitimate if it hasn't come from the ministry. Good to talk to you, Brian. That's Dr. Brian Betty, who's the Medical Director from the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners. A vaccine event serving Māori and Pacific people with disabilities kicks off today with a focus on inclusion. The event, Rally Your Village, runs until tomorrow evening at the Pacific Locality Vaccination Centre in Otara. As RNZ Pacific's Alicia Foon reports, it's hoped it will raise awareness about the needs of disability communities.
Festival flavour and freebies, ushering in potentially hundreds of people from Māori and Pacific disability communities at a drive-through vaccine event in Auckland this weekend. It's being run by volunteers from South Seas Healthcare Trust in partnership with Taikura Trust, Tofa Mamau Collective and Te Rupu Waiora. South Seas Clinical Director Dr. Andrew Chanmao says it'll be a memorable experience.
A drive-through, but specifically for people with disability and cater specifically for them so it doesn't upset anybody and they feel comfortable and safe in that environment. So we got spot prizes, we got Mr. Whippy, ice cream truck, coffee, we got street food, kids packs, whether you name it, and we also give out vouchers.
Taikura Trust Chief Executive Sonia Hawea says it was crucial they dedicate an event to serve the disability community.
We need to think carefully about the language that we use, the methods that we use to deliver health services. And I think recognising the disability community through these times has been a really important shift, and that's going to be sustained by the partnership. So these partnerships are not one-off either, they'll be sustained partnerships, which is really positive.
Te Rupu Waiora Trust Manager Tanya Kingi says Aotearoa hasn't done enough to prioritise people with disabilities around vaccinations.
I don't think this country has made enough effort to ensure that it's accessible and that it's culturally relevant. So therefore you have a population that's caught in the middle that we're trying to reach. We're specifically targeting our population that have impairments. We're celebrating the value that we place on their membership in our communities.
Tunu Mafono Ava Fa'amoe is the National Executive Officer of Tofa Mamau Collective and also has a disability. He says disabled people are not sitting around idle, but are actively taking part and contributing to the cause.
We, as disabled people, continue to work alongside the rest of our community, team of 5 million, to do our part. We're actively involved in the process, and also part of that process is encouraging our disabled people right across Auckland to be vaccinated, not just for ourselves, but for our families, but most of all, for the ones that, for legitimate reason, can't be vaccinated.
He says not everyone can be vaccinated.
There's a lot of disabled people for legitimate medical reasons, can't wear masks, also can't be vaccinated. So we also have to be mindful and support of those people so that when they're in public, they're not ridiculed because the others fail to understand why they don't get vaccinated, why they don't wear masks.
Although 3 Auckland DHBs have hit a 90% first dose milestone for Pacific, Sonia Hawea says they want to go above the 90% target for both Māori and Pacific.
I think many of us will say we're not satisfied with 90%, that we want to make sure we've reached all of our community wherever they are and keep going until we know they've had that information and opportunity.
Rally Your Village runs until 8 tomorrow night.
The COVID treatment kit keeps getting larger, with health authorities ordering 120,000 courses of antivirals to combat mild to moderate COVID cases. The joint effort from the Ministry of Health and Pharmac comes as overseas cases spike during the northern winter. It's hoped the combination of high vaccination rates, more medicine options and the booster shot will prepare New Zealand in time for our next winter. Somya Bam-Iripati reports.
New Zealand's drug agency has ordered 60,000 courses of 2-tablet medications in the race to secure treatments for COVID-19. Pharmac Chief Executive Sarah Fitt says 2 of the new medicines involve taking a 5-day course of pills. She says it's also looking at a 3rd treatment, which can be given intravenously or by injection.
So that brings our suite of treatments secured so far to 6. 3 of them are already in use in the hospitals. 3 of them are subject to MedSafe approval, and we're hoping to secure stock of those next year. And we're continuing to work with other suppliers.
Ms Fitt says it hasn't yet determined who will be eligible for the drugs, but supplies will be limited. The Health Ministry's Chief Science Advisor, Dr Ian Town, says New Zealand currently uses pre-existing medications for severe to critical cases. He says the new medicines will help prevent cases from getting to that stage.
We can have a drug that's made available to someone with a recent diagnosis of COVID-19, then we're able to perhaps slow the progression of the condition and prevent them needing more intensive medical care or even ending up in hospital.
Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield says the current outbreak in Europe is the equivalent of New Zealand having between 3,000 to 4,000 cases and 10 to 20 deaths a day. He says numbers are high in Europe because it's winter, so agencies here are working to secure the new medicines before the next New Zealand winter.
One of the things we're turning our minds to is how do we prepare for next winter, is starting now. And our treatments and making sure we've got those available will be a key part of that.
The authorities say modelling here and overseas, in countries such as Ireland, has guided the agency on the amount of drugs it's ordered.
It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muri aki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the DG of Health agrees to release more data on unvaccinated Māori, but is it too little, too late? On the outskirts of Auckland, Santa has apparently traded the sleigh in for a sturdy tinsel-covered van. Mother of 7, Jennifer O'Harville, does the rural courier delivery run around to Helensville and Kaupakapa route, 50 kilometres northwest of Auckland. And these days, locals can't miss her, decked out in her Santa kit. As well as doing her normal deliveries, she's been handing out a few little extra treats too. And Jennifer joins us now via Skype. Whoa, that is one jazzy mask there, Jennifer. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why?
Just going out and seeing the local children and just giving them a chance to have a photo with Santa. It's just because the community was so supportive of me during the lockdown and the busy time. You know, they checked on me, made sure I didn't need anything, afternoon tea, a coffee, that sort of stuff. So, you know, it's just giving back.
So, Jennifer, for the people who are listening rather than watching, can you please give us a description of your attire? Exactly what are you kitted out in?
A Santa suit.
A full noise Santa suit, complete with beard, a mask that has twinkly lights on it and the big old red rig. So you're in a rural setting. You must be pretty busy at the moment with the old courier deliveries.
Very busy. We're busier than we've ever been.
Yeah, and so what kind of kilometres do you clock up every day in your Santa suit?
Just over 100 k's.
Wow. And what's the reaction been to this? And what are you doing when you're out and about?
So I stop at people's places. I get them to book with me, and it's on a Sunday, not when I'm doing my normal deliveries. And we do a photo, the kids get to meet me, and they get a little gift.
Do you think, with the situation at the moment, you know, people have been in isolation for a long time in Auckland. Are people a bit nervous going to the places where they normally might meet Santa?
Yes, they are. Some are looking back, forward to getting back out there, of course, but most people seem to be happy just to stay at home at this stage.
Hey, it's been stinkingly hot the last few days in Auckland. How are you coping? And what is it? Well, it's a fleecy onesie, pretty much. How are you coping, Jennifer?
I have a fan sitting right next to me.
Right now, but what about when you're in the car?
It's not too bad most of the time.
Well, keep up the good work. It's an absolute pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us. That is Jennifer O'Havel, who's a rural courier, and she does about 100 k's a day at the moment, dropping off parcels, and she's wearing the full Santa rig. And I tell you, it's been flipping hot in Auckland the last few days. Now, let's head to Dunedin, where prehistoric predators of the deep have taken over Otago Museum. The Sea Monsters exhibition opens its 5-month run there tomorrow. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown went along for a sneak peek and filed this report.
The Auckland War Memorial Museum was meant to host the Sea Monsters exhibition for more than 3 months earlier this year, but the Delta outbreak ended what was proving to be a crowd puller after only a month. Now Aucklanders keen to see it will have to travel to Otago Museum when the border opens. Otago Museum's exhibition designer, Shania Cunningham, says it's well worth the trip.
From what Auckland has told us, it was super popular during their school holidays, so we're hoping that lots of families will come and be able to enjoy it here.
Produced by the Australian National Maritime Museum, just getting sea monsters to Dunedin and setting up the displays was a mammoth task itself, with some of them up to 13 metres long.
We actually took 4 container loads down on a ship to get everything here, and unloading that into the gallery is always a bit of Tetris. So you've got lots of crates that store all the objects and the bones, and then you've got to fit it all in and make it look good.
What's on display will delight the kids, both big and small, and some of the creatures on display might be familiar to Jurassic Park fans. But natural science curator Emma Burns makes clear these aren't dinosaurs.
Oh, they're technically not dinosaurs. They're marine reptiles, so they come from a completely different lineage. And this includes the ichthyosaurs, which were the large, almost dolphin-shaped species. We've got one behind me here, the Tyrannosaurus. And they grew to be one of the largest species of marine creature in the world, bar the blue whale, which is now the largest one that ever existed.
She says some of the creatures on display would have once been spotted in the waters off the coast of New Zealand, if only humans were around to see them.
I think my favourite would have to be the plesiosaur, mostly because we've got one here at the museum as well, which we're really proud of, which is one of the largest fossils in New Zealand museums, and that was found right here in Otago as well.
At $10 a ticket, getting up close and personal to a mosasaur or megalodon won't break the bank either. But for those wanting to get 20,000 leagues under the sea for free, there's also the museum's first ever augmented reality exhibition, Plunge. The museum's head of exhibitions, Craig Scott, says a talented team member in-house designed it all.
Well, one of our staff is really expert at developing face filters and stuff for Instagram and TikTok. So we thought, why not try and utilise their skills here?
The result is a QR code activated interactive display which swims through the museum's beautiful science gallery.
It's the first time we've actually ever attempted anything like this, but basically the visitor will be able to access QR codes that will take them to different experiences that they can view through their phone that'll be in the space. So everything from sea monsters flying around you to cool face filters, just a hand-activated motion bubbles. So yeah, it's very, very cool.
Both exhibitions open at Otago Museum tomorrow, with sea monsters on display until May the 1st.
And if you were listening to that, do check out Timothy's piece online, some fantastic pictures of that display. While New Zealanders grapple with a brown sugar shortage, Canadians are also dipping into their emergency maple syrup supplies. But they planned ahead, stockpiling their favourite sweetener so the shelves never run bare. CBC's Sarah Levitt reports.
Welcome to Laurierville, a small, unassuming town about a 2 hours drive from Montreal. It's got its church, its bank, its library, and its maple syrup emergency reserve. Wait, what? That's right, the world's only emergency supply of that oh-so-sweet sticky stuff.
As you can see, we're not out of syrup.
It's a strategic move by Quebec maple syrup producers to ensure no Canadian ever has to deal with a lack of syrup at the breakfast table.
We take syrup off the market when it's in a surplus, when there's no home for it. We put it in the white barrels here, we store it, and when it comes time, we have a year like this year where sales went up, production went down a bit, we're able to fill the market.
Every single one of these barrels has about 272 kilos of maple syrup inside. I've done a little bit of math, and that's the equivalent of about 400 cans. With all these barrels, that sure is a lot of maple syrup. About 45 million kilograms in all, say the producers. They're tapping into about half of it after a less than stellar year of production. It's a significant chunk from the reserve, but producers say it's serving its purpose.
I feel that next December when we talk, people will still be putting maple syrup on their pancakes. Okay. I don't believe we're going to have to resort to Aunt John Mimer or corn syrup.
Oh, and don't worry, there won't be any maple syrup heist from this warehouse. What's security like here?
I wouldn't try and break in. That's all I'll say.
Maple syrup, delicious, but super expensive. Is golden syrup just as good? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. Text me on 2101. Hey, David's got in touch, and this is a very interesting dilemma that David faces, and I bet there's a few of you out there in the same position, so I really want to hear from you on this. David says the opening up of the border, we are double vaxxed, Aucklanders, heading south for Christmas, with the expectation from whānau that we will attend their gatherings. They are declining the vaccine. Is there any public health guidance about keeping ourselves and them safe from COVID in this context? I think this issue will be coming up all over the country. We are reluctant to attend, yet the weight of expectation is high. That is a really awkward one. What do you do about it? Are you in the same situation? How are you handling it? Do you feel safe going? And if they don't want to be vaccinated and you are, what do you do?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tupole. The judge sentencing Eli Epiha to life today says his actions showed a determination to kill police officers. Epiha will spend at least 27 years behind bars for killing Constable Matthew Hunt and attempting to murder his colleague David Goldfinch after fleeing a routine traffic stop in West Auckland last year. Justice Venning told Epiha the unarmed officers were no threat.
The use of a semi-automatic firearm against an unarmed police officer by shooting him from short range 4 times, the last 3 when his back was turned, was cowardly and displayed a degree of brutality and callousness.
Justice Venning rejected an offer to read an apology by Epiha. Police recruits are being sent north to help run the checkpoints being set up at the Northland border. Two checkpoints will operate when Auckland's border opens next Wednesday, one near Uretiti and one near Maungaturoto. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The checkpoints are being run by police and Taitokoro Border Control, who will be checking everyone has the right documents. Alongside 74 police staff, there will be 46 recruits and another 46 constabulary staff who've just graduated from police college running the operation, although they will not have any powers to arrest. Police say the recruits and recent graduates are being deployed to best utilise police resources over what's expected to be a very busy holiday period.
Laboratory scientists are warning that Napier Port's decision to do its own surveillance testing for COVID-19 is a disaster waiting to happen. The port says the saliva tests, which are done by a nurse and a trainee, will not replace official public health testing, but provide an extra layer of protection. However, the president of the Institute of Medical Laboratory Science, Tēnā, says these tests won't have any legitimacy.
Every other laboratory in New Zealand, commercial or publicly owned, has to have the appropriate qualified people doing the work and also the appropriate facility accreditation to do the work. And in this case, clearly, neither of those are the case.
Tēnā says to have unregulated testing could put the wider population at risk. An Auckland doctor is warning a lockdown backlog is causing a rise in breast cancer that could have been detected months earlier. Breast Cancer Foundation NZ's modelling shows at least 133 women are living with undetected breast cancer because their mammogram was cancelled in lockdown over the last 2 years. Dr Heidi McRae was due to have a routine mammogram in August, which was cancelled due to lockdown. She managed to detect early symptoms due to her medical knowledge.
I started to get some very unusual symptoms which are not typical of breast cancer at all. And because I'm a doctor and knew what was going on, I managed to persuade Auckland Breast Centre to do my mammogram. And bingo, there was a 2.5 centimetre tumour there that I couldn't feel.
After 2 years of lockdowns, the Ministry of Health says the backlog for regular breast screening has risen to 50,000 women compared to before the pandemic. The Crown has told the Waitangi Tribunal it has not breached the treaty in the pandemic response and vaccine rollout for Māori. The Tribunal is holding a special hearing into the response and lagging vaccination rates. It was brought by the Māori Council, which argues that obligations of partnership and protection have been breached through the Crown's decisions. But in his closing submission, Crown Law Counsel Jason Goff said while there have been shortcomings, it's too soon to say if there's been a breach. Mr Goff says some things, like the delivery of funds to Māori health providers, moved more slowly than would have been desired. Pressure on the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is increasing amid continuing public anger over newly imposed COVID restrictions and a Christmas party held at his official residence last year in violation of the country's lockdown. 2 other parties said to have taken place are now also being investigated. Here's the BBC's Rob Watson.
It's about hypocrisy. It's this sort of sense that the British people have that there was one rule for them and there was one rule for the people in power, and not over some sort of obscure issue, but over life and death. So it's this idea that on 18th of December last year, when one of the parties was held, people weren't able to visit sick and dying relatives in hospital. They cancelled all their Christmas plans, and guess what? Meanwhile, it was a rather different story of behaviour in Downing Street.
Back home, a child has died after being dragged from the water in Napier this afternoon. Emergency services were called to Marine Parade just after 3:30. 4 police officers and a member of the public dove in to help but were unable to save the child. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, singer and producer Debbie Harwood picks the mixtape. The Country Life team visit a bird highway that links up pockets of old forest with new plantings so that birds can travel from the Remutaka Range across to the Aorangi Forest. And for Friday Night Live, we join Andrew Cogan in concert at the King's Arms in 2015. And the theme for Sonic Tonic is What a Year That Was. That's Nights with me, Karen Hay, in for Brian Crump after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods and isolated showers more frequent tomorrow afternoon and evening, with some possibly heavy. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Taupo and Taihape, a few showers, mainly afternoon and evening, some heavy with possible thunderstorms today. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Wairarapa, cloudy periods and occasional light showers or drizzle, more persistent for Kapiti to Wellington. Rain developing in the south and west late tomorrow. For Nelson, Bulla and Westland, periods of rain, possibly heavy turning to showers tomorrow and clearing south of about Hokitika. Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, often cloudy, scattered rain developing this evening, widespread for a time tomorrow. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, mainly fine, a few showers about the coast spreading elsewhere for a time tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, often cloudy, a few showers and also expected tomorrow night as well. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Nā mihi marama, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen Tēnā. After 2 High Court judicial reviews, the Director-General of Health is releasing data of unvaccinated Māori in the North Island, but with clear conditions. Whānau Ora first took the Ministry of Health to court in October, arguing the data was critical to boosting vaccination rates and saving lives. The Ministry gave some data about unvaccinated Māori in Waikato and Auckland, and in a letter sent to John Tamahere last night, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield laid out what other data they will release, as well as the iwi who opposed the release. Māori News correspondent Matai O'Connor reports.
Getting more Māori vaccinated. That was the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency's aim when it requested data on Māori who are unvaccinated against COVID in the Bay of Plenty, Hawke's Bay, Lakes District, Northland, Wairarapa and Whanganui DHB areas. That data would include their name and contact details. The request ended up in court more than once. Now, Director-General of Health Ashley Bloomfield has agreed to provide the agency with data relating to all unvaccinated Māori in Northland, Hawke's Bay and Whanganui, but a reduced amount of data on those in Wairarapa, Lakes DHB and Bay of Plenty, as some iwi in those areas oppose the release of data to the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency. Its Chief Executive, John Tamahere, says it's too little too late.
It takes us about 5 to 6 days to mine it and then bring our regions together to work out a redeployment of our assets against information now that where we can target for the very first time our vaccination capability.
Mr. Tamahere says they aren't sure on the exact date the data will be given to the agency, and the process has taken longer than it needed to.
It's a sense of sabotage, but here's the remarkable thing about it. It's premeditated. If it was by mistake, I'd get it. But this chap has been absolutely resistant at every turn for this.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says there were issues he had to work through.
This latest release did have a particular issue that I needed to give really careful thought to, in that there were several rohi around the North Island where iwi had made it clear that their view was that they didn't want data for their iwi members to be shared with the Whānau Ora Collective.
He says he hasn't heard back from the iwi who were against the data being shared since he sent the letter to Mr. Tamahere. But Dr. Bloomfield says he has been consulting with Māori throughout.
For the iwi that weren't so enthusiastic about it, I wanted to make sure that we did go through a due process and, to the best of our ability, listened to their concerns. But also for many of them, they wanted to receive the data themselves too, so that they could follow up with their iwi members, and we facilitated that as well.
Now it's just a waiting game for the data to be given to Whānau Ora to help increase vaccination rates for Māori across Aotearoa.
Just before we went to the news, I read out a bit of feedback from David, who's kind of got an awkward situation. He's heading from Auckland down south for Christmas and is expected to turn up at some whānau events. He's vaccinated, along with people travelling from Auckland, but they are not. And he's kind of wondering, what to do. Katrina from Wellington says, no vax, no visit. So very clear there. Another listener says the question is, do you have COVID rather than are you vaccinated? Well, that's an awkward one as well. Unless you're regularly tested, you don't necessarily know immediately. Duncan's got in touch to say, I got vaccinated so that I'm protected when my 2 anti-vax flatmates get the disease. I'm not concerned about that. They are only a danger to themselves. And Dave's got in touch to say that although he's vaccinated and he's going to get a booster shortly, he's made the choice not to ask other people about their vaccination status and says, I choose not to live my life in fear nor discriminate against people, including friends who pre-COVID enriched my life. Living is risky, Dave says. It's ironic we don't apply the same fear to things like driving. Keep your feedback coming on that one. It's an interesting dilemma. Text me on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Women and Māori beneficiaries are having to pay back their debt to the Ministry of Social Development at a higher rate than their male and Pākehā counterparts. Māori on average also owe more to MSD than Pākehā. Advocates and political parties say it reeks of discrimination and racism, and they want a debt amnesty for all beneficiaries. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
More than 500,000 New Zealanders are in debt to MSD at an average of $3,400 each. For Māori, that average is almost $1,000 more. Auckland Action Against Poverty's Brooke Powell-Stanley says people are taking out these loans just to live.
So if you get a food grant, then you don't have to pay that back. But everything else, if you require support with rent, bills arrears, if your babies need uniforms, stationery, help with car repairs, everything, all of that becomes debt for you.
Men on average pay back $11.09 a week, while women on average pay $16.33 a week. When split by ethnicity, Pākehā on average pay $12.78 weekly and Māori $16.01 per week. The figures were obtained by Green MP Ricardo Menendez-March, who says it reeks of systemic discrimination.
A person on the benefit that has had access to not face discrimination can more easily navigate a conversation with a case manager around reducing debt to the absolute minimum. This is where we see the biases at play.
Te Pāti Māori co-leader Debbie Ngāriwa-Paka says the numbers are heartbreaking.
It's just scary. It's really, really frightening. The Minister, and we demand that she actually takes charge of this and explains to those of the rest of Aotearoa what this government's going to do to take this burden off these whānau and off these wahine and their tamariki.
Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni says there has been a lot of work to reduce debt for clients in a way they can afford. And she says wahine Māori beneficiaries are better off under this government.
On average, they are better off by about $175 per week now because of the changes that we've made to the welfare system, because of the increases that we have put in place. So we have made significant progress, but as I always say, there's still more to do.
She doesn't think bias is the cause of the higher weekly repayments for Māori and women, rather that women are more likely to take out loans and Māori are overrepresented in working age benefits.
I think the level of debt that different people are taking on in the system has a role to play with that. And so, I certainly think that there are some equity issues with regards to income adequacy in our country in general, and it's reflected in the welfare system.
Brooke Powell-Stanley says how much people pay weekly should not be influenced by how much they owe.
People have a lot of debt because they need support because benefits are already so low. And so it has nothing to do with how much people owe. It's got to do with how racist the system is.
Ricardo Menendez-March says repayments should be automatically set as low as possible to improve equity.
The conversation should be less about how do we ensure that the person on the benefit pays their debt fastest, and it should be centered more about how do we ensure that we're not putting somebody in hardship.
Ultimately, the Greens, Te Pāti Māori and Auckland Action Against Poverty all want a debt amnesty to wipe the slate clean. However, Carmel Sepuloni says an amnesty would require a law change, and that's not being considered.
The government's unveiled a plan to tidy up and modernise laws that protect wildlife. The Conservation Minister's got her eye on little blue penguins and bats, ensuring that development around them doesn't disturb their habitats. Tom Kitchen explains.
Development and the environment are hardly natural bedfellows. The Conservation Minister has set her sights on making it a more harmonious relationship. Announcing a law change on the rugged south coast of Te Whanganui Atara, Kerry Allen used the example of pika pika, bats, and development in Taranaki.
You've got a developer that's going to be developing a new highway. Sure, they need to translocate some pika pika from this particular spot to another. There is nothing within the Wildlife Act that enables us to be able to grant or provide guidance about the translocation. We can only grant permits once something is dead.
A marina development at Waiheke Island has been the site of protests throughout the year, with people worried it will disturb the habitat of little blue penguins. Kerry Allen says a rejig of the Wildlife Act will help settle these kinds of issues.
First would be to fix up a couple of a range of different issues related to conservation processes and management areas, as well as a fundamental rehaul of the Wildlife Act, which has created some of the perverse outcomes that I think that all users of conservation environment broadly agree to.
The minister announced the change today, just a day after getting the all clear from doctors following her battle with cancer earlier this year.
Well, this morning I woke up just before 5 with this incredible spring in my step, ready to crack in and crack on. And making this announcement today is really timely, because it's exactly why I got into politics, to make fundamental reform.
Jamie Ferguson, a tumuaki or partner at Kahui Legal, a Māori law firm, says the reform could work well for tangata whenua.
That relationship has been one where they essentially, our conservation estate has been treated as almost devoid of people and being a place for simply plants and animals and birds, whereas in fact for tangata whenua they are intimately and innately a part of that.
He's calling it a good step forward.
Very, very much a positive. I mean, I think we've been faced with kind of many decades of kind of negative connotations and always struggling to have that voice and to exercise it.
The reform still has to go through Parliament, but the government hopes change will begin in 2023.
It's 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Anti-violence advocates want more Pacific workers to be employed in a cross-party approach to the government's new plan to tackle family and sexual harm. New Zealand announced its first national strategy for eliminating family and sexual violence called Te Arorere Kura, which will see 10 agencies working together. The 25-year strategy also includes a plan to improve services for underserved communities, including Māori and Pacifica. RNZ Pacific's Alicia Foon has more.
At least 80% of family and sexual harm currently goes unreported in Aotearoa. But there's hope that will change. The New Zealand government is rolling out a new 25-year strategy to address family harm within Aotearoa and improve services for Māori and Pacific communities. General Manager at Wellington Rape Crisis, Kayla Rayner, wants more Pacific workers to be employed under the government's plan to tackle family harm.
We do not have enough Pasifika people in our workforce providing these specialist skills. And equally, we know that Pasifika people are not accessing our specialist services. And we know that the vast majority of Pasifika people who require this just don't see our services as the place that's the right fit for them.
She also hopes people find courage to share their experience going forward.
We're still kind of deeply entrenched in our history of this being a really taboo topic and a really painful topic for individuals and families to deal with. We are still sitting in the myths and some of the other barriers that stop survivors and families seeking help.
The plan outlines an improvement in safe and tailored services to be available for Pacific peoples, tangata whenua and ethnic communities. For perpetrators of violence, the changes would see accountability and support to address past trauma. Co-founder of She Is Not Your Rehab, Sarah Brown, finds it heartening.
This is not just something that can be undertaken quickly, and so I'm really glad that the 25 years has been put in place because it has to be a long-term strategy. I love that the strategy has a focus on healing. I love the terminology around that, especially for men who are victims of violence, and this does include violence at the state.
Sarah Brown says she'd like to see a plan for Pākehā men and not just Pacific and Māori communities. But Chief Executive of Women's Refuge, Dr. Ange Dury, says the new long-term plan to end family and sexual violence won't work without cross-party support.
This is work that needs to happen. It's a starting place. It's a line in the sand to try and create change. What I'm really hoping that I've been asking for today is that we can achieve some cross-party support for the strategy. I think that's going to be imperative to success.
Gandhi Nivas provides early intervention and prevention services for New Zealand men who are at risk of committing harm in the family home. Nearly 60% of men who have been through its program have been prevented from reoffending. Founder Anjana Patel says the key to transformation is including entire families in the process of healing.
Having this whānau approach where it is not, you don't want it to be a blame and shame program. It's got to be restorative justice. It's got to be help change behaviour in order to make a difference in society.
The government currently spends $1.5 billion to $2 billion annually on the consequences of family and sexual violence.
As researchers pore over data to work out the likely impact of the Omicron variant, Pfizer has announced a fourth shot may be necessary. But the World Health Organization is warning wealthy nations not to hoard vaccine stocks, as many developing countries still lag behind. The ABC's Alexia Atwood reports.
There we go. Understand. Can you press it for me?
Yep.
Like many of us around the world, South African nurse Zodwa Koutou is in a nervous holding pattern. She's waiting for the latest clinical data about the Omicron variant to assess just how wary we need to be.
It is concerning that it spreads faster, more so that people do not seem to respond in terms of attendance to come and vaccinate. And if it spreads faster, then it becomes a problem.
In what could be a sign to come, South Africa is battling a fourth wave fuelled by the variant, with a 255% increase in total cases in the past week. But it's predictions like this that we're hoping to hear more of. The Africa Health Research Institute's Professor Willem Hanekom says they're seeing signs Omicron causes less severe symptoms in most people it infects compared to other strains of COVID.
The early indications all point to less severe disease caused by this variant, especially in persons who were vaccinated. So that's also good news.
Having already been burnt by Delta before, global leaders and pharmaceutical companies aren't taking chances though. Early laboratory results from Pfizer suggest the standard 2 doses won't be enough against Omicron, like it is against Delta. But a booster vaccine could help control the spread of the new variant. And now, Pfizer's chief executive, Albert Bourla, told US media a fourth dose could be needed 12 months after the third shot to manage Omicron.
We have made multiple times clear that we will be able to have a vaccine in less than 100 days. In fact, we have already 2 vaccines built in less than 100 days. We built one for Delta that we didn't need to use because the current vaccine is very effective against Delta, and we built one for Beta, which also we didn't have to use. So we will build one at risk right now for Omicron that will be used only in case we need it, if we see that the current one doesn't work.
But as developed countries turn their minds to third and fourth shots, it seems we're running up against the same problem: vaccine inequity between rich and poor nations. The rate of booster shots that are being given daily in developed countries outpace even the first shots given in developing countries. Dr. Kate O'Brien is the Director of the Department of Immunisation, Vaccines and Biologicals within the World Health Organization.
Countries have been waiting. They have been waiting and waiting and waiting. It's going to come, it's going to come, it's going to come. And now it is starting to come, and we have to make sure that it continues. As we head into whatever the Omicron situation is going to be, there is risk that the global supply is again going to revert to high-income countries hoarding vaccine.
Australia will start the rollout of the Pfizer vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds next month, with 8 weeks recommended between doses. As families weigh up what to do, one poll by Melbourne's Royal Children's Hospital shows parents will feel most comfortable taking their children to their GP or school clinic for the jabs. The ABC's Samantha Donovan reports.
Sydney mother Jane has an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old and is keen to get them vaccinated against COVID.
My husband and I are both vaccinated ourselves. We fully support vaccination, but I think I want to sort of understand a bit more about the plan for children, how it's going to happen, maybe what the risks are.
The federal government has announced 5 to 11-year-olds will be able to get their vaccinations from GPs, Aboriginal health services, community pharmacies and state and territory clinics. And the states and territories will be responsible for any school-based programs. As part of its national child health poll, Melbourne's Royal Children's Hospital surveyed 1,400 parents with children aged between 5 and 11 to get their thoughts on vaccinating that age group. About half were in favour, a third were undecided, and 82% were watching to see how children overseas reacted to the vaccine. Dr. Anthea Rhodes is a paediatrician and the poll's director. She says parents also had clear opinions on where they'd like their children children to get their injections.
62% of parents said that they would be more likely to get their child vaccinated if it was available at the family GP. Just over half said they would be more likely to go ahead if there was a clinic on site at their child's school. So we know that options that are trustworthy to parents are going to be really important when it comes to getting that vaccination done.
GP and AMA Vice President Dr Chris Moy says while he and his colleagues are pleased the very young will soon be offered the protection of the vaccine, the expansion of the rollout adds to their already heavy workload.
What we have is a very tired workforce who've done so much to vaccinate the Australian community. It's a big ask because vaccinating children may be, in fact, harder than vaccinating adults, mainly because of the issues of making sure that the kids are reassured when having the vaccinations, but beyond that, actually obtaining consent. There may be parents with different views about the vaccinations, so it does open up these more complex issues.
Are doctors going to be paid enough to spend that extra time on vaccinating young children?
There's been nothing offered for general practice in terms of increased support to be able to vaccinate children, despite the fact that it may be more complex. This is despite the fact that they even acknowledge that it will be more difficult. General practice also feels greatly let down because of the effective reduction in support for GPs to provide booster shots. Being frank, despite the fact that general practice has done such a great job to vaccinate the majority of the population, it really has been a very marginal thing for general practice, and most practices have done it for the country, really.
To the US state of Massachusetts, where a turkey is causing traffic mayhem. The bird has taken a shine to a road in a small town on the outskirts of Boston. As CNN's Ted Wayman reports, it's left residents asking, why did the turkey cross the road?
Cars and trucks slowing down so they don't run over a 30-pound turkey that has taken up residence here for the past month.
I look for her every day.
Patty McNeil keeps an eye out for the turkey. So does Nick O'Connell.
Traffic jams galore, honking, people just all the way down the street into Sudbury traffic, and there's really nothing that's been done about it.
And that's the problem. Local, state, and federal laws protect the bird from being moved by any one group.
They do not have jurisdiction over a turkey. We've contacted our own animal control officer. She has told us it's out of her jurisdiction. We have to contact Mass Wildlife and attempt to relocate the turkey.
People stop traffic to take pictures of the unnamed bird, but she will often sit on her perch and watch traffic go by on Route 20, waiting for her cue to cross the road on her time, as her admirers watch her hoping she will survive all this traffic and attention.
It's very hard to catch her because she flies, so I'm just hoping that no one hits her.
I think she'd probably be happier in a pasture somewhere. Route 20 is not exactly luxurious.
Goodness me, one lucky turkey or not, maybe it'll end up on someone's Christmas table. Couple of suggestions from our listeners about the vaccinated, not vaccinated family get-togethers at Christmas. This person says no vaccine, we'll have an outdoor picnic instead. Another says the government announced yesterday rapid antigen testing has been made available free to the unvaccinated over summer. They take 15 minutes, and unvaccinated can simply do the test as often as necessary to reassure their vaccinated family and friends they pose only a minimal risk. On the subject of maple syrup, Dave says maple syrup rules. Just use it sparingly. Have a fantastic weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The judge sentencing Eli Epiha to life today says his actions showed a determination to kill police officers. A child has died after being dragged from the water in Napier this afternoon. Police recruits are being sent north to help run the checkpoints that will be set up at the Northland border. And pressure on the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is increasing amid public anger over new COVID restrictions and a Christmas party held at his official residence last year in violation of the country's lockdown. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Christmas music this Sunday morning, principally actually from that Aussie singing legend Paul Kelly with his very different Yuletide album, but also the music that makes you spend more than you want to spend when you shop. Research on ageing, why women live longer, but also why men